Yo, 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 yo. What is up, everybody? John Middlekauff, 3 and Out Podcast, live here on the YouTube. Subscribe to the YouTube, subscribe to the podcast down in the description, and let's dive into the National Football League. Well, I wanted to start with a guy that goes by the name The Hoodie. Bill, I guess his real name would be William Belichick. And Belichick today at the Combine, of course, avoided the coach's picture, as he does every year. He's the only guy that refuses to take the coach's picture. I don't know why. I think it's actually like he should go. It'd be kind of funny. But that's, rinse, wash, repeat. Every year he is not going to be part of that. But he said something today that to me was a little enlightening. And we've been talking about him now, I guess, for probably several weeks. Because there was a story that he was going to become the offensive coordinator. And I'm all for that. Like, who doesn't want to see Bill Belichick be the offensive coordinator? I think we can all raise our hands like that makes the Patriots pretty interesting. Because without Bill Belichick, let's face it, the Patriots would be very, very uninteresting. And while they're quote-unquote probably not considered the biggest national brand over the last couple decades, they were easily one of the league's biggest cash cows with the combination of Bill and of Tom. Now, since Bill lost Tom, let's face it. If you've ever met an older guy who is very, very successful and very, very rich, one, they have some things in common. I think it's fair to somewhat stereotype them. They can be stubborn. Why are they stubborn? Well, because when you're 65, 70, 75 years old and you've had a lot of success, you're probably not changing your ways. That's not saying that you're not open to trying new things. Clearly, Bill is. But you have some philosophical beliefs that ain't going to budge, that are not going to change. And also, part of Bill, because he's so tied to one person, there is this competitive nature. I mean, at the end of the day, he's a football coach, and Tom is a football player. Their job is literally to compete. And now they're not just competing against other teams. They are competitive against each other. And Bill said something today about not having an offensive and defensive coordinator. And listen, he said, I'm not that big on titles. And I think I've told this story before. As I live with this guy, good friend of mine. When I moved back to do the West Coast in San Francisco, very, very successful financial advisor. He now works in hedge funds. He's like a year older than me. He was my cousin's good buddy. Ivy League guy, brilliant, absolute wheeler and dealer hustler. And I remember he changed jobs when I was living with him. And he told me, like, I was so big on getting the right title on my office, the title on my office. And I ended up making less money because I was so obsessed with the title. Titles are pretty irrelevant, right? Would you rather be called a senior vice president and make $200,000 or have be called an intern and make $500,000? Ultimately, titles are somewhat hollow. There's got to be substance behind the title, and what you make or your responsibilities are always the most important, more than just some title on a team or a company's website. Who gives a shit? Now, unlike a company, right, whether you're an intern, a senior vice president, how much you're making and what you're actually doing is important. You do need two people on game day to call the offensive plays and to call the defensive plays. Now, one thing I appreciate about Bill, he's got a little renegade to him. He's not a big Rhule follower. I never have been either. There are things, I know people get caught up in Bill pushing the envelope. I like anyone that pushes the envelope. I like that Belichick pisses people off. That, to me, is a very relatable quality for myself in Bill Belichick. I have a lot of admiration for his not giving a shit what other people think to him. But to me, this feels like a little bit of an ego play / he doesn't have anybody. And I've been saying for a while, like, he did an incredible job of molding all these people for decades, right? All these guys that went on to become GMs, all these guys that went on to become coaches. Like, eventually you're going to run out. And the number of guys that left him is pretty insane. Like, if you went to work for Bill Belichick over the last 20 years, more likely than not, you made a shit. He made probably more millionaires as a head coach. It would probably come down to him or Andy Reid. More millionaires, general managers, and coaches. That includes assistant coaches that went on to be OCs and DCs other places, as well as the guys that became OCs and DCs under him that became head coaches, than anyone in league history. Now, we'll see. Times will change. McVay, Shanahan, they're popping guys out at a high rate too as well. But I would say right now, Belichick and Andy Reid were just producing those guys at a really high level. Eventually, you run out. Because part of, like, the thing with Bill, if you're a young guy, you're like, well, it's really miserable. It's really hard, but you're going to win Super Bowls. That was guaranteed. Well, the last couple of years, that's not guaranteed anymore, right? It's like, if I remove Bill Belichick from the New England Patriots, and let's just take a solid coach, like Ron Rivera, no chance on God's green earth they would make the playoffs this year. Absolutely zero. Like, the only reason that the Patriots made the playoffs last year and will compete to make it again this year, even though the AFC is clearly harder, is because of Bill Belichick. Their quarterback is average as the day is long. They don't have that many transcendent players on their team, and they basically just run the ball and play defense, right? And, he's the defensive mastermind. But not naming an OC and DC, to me, is a little bit of an ego play. It's like, watch what I can do. Because I think here's what he has to know. But he'd never admit this, not in a million years. And I'm psychoanalyzing a little bit. But he's never going to win another Super Bowl. That's never going to happen. The AFC is way too hard, and ultimately his quarterback is just not going to be good enough. I don't even think that's an opinion. That's just a fact. Now, he can make the playoffs as a wild card like he did last year, and it is very admirable. It's very impressive that he's making the playoffs with Mac Jones and a bunch of offensive players beside the running backs you can't even name. Like, you can't name any of his wide receivers. So he's going to have to keep doing moves like this because Tom couldn't get another Super Bowl in Tampa. Bill can't. But Bill can do things like, well, how about the year when Belichick won 10 games and was the 7th seed? He was the offensive coordinator, and he did not have a defensive coordinator. Like, you get credit for that. That's kind of adding to his resume because he knows he's never going to win another Lombardi there again. He would never in a million years probably even admit that privately. But come on, let's just call a spade a spade. You're not winning a Super Bowl in the AFC with Mac Jones and an average roster when you literally have to outcoach people every single week. And here's the other thing. Like, he lost Josh McDaniels. Josh McDaniels took some of the guys from that staff, some young people like Mike Lombardi's son, Mick. Like, those were type guys Bill was molding, and then they left. So I think Bill's just in trouble in the sense that he doesn't have the young coaches on the staff anymore. And two, like, his ego's at play a little bit because the competitiveness with Tom and trying to add to his legacy is just the only thing he really has left. Like, he gets credit for 10, 11 win seasons. Like, now Tom is only playing for Super Bowls. That's the only thing that matters to him. That's not really Bill anymore. Bill's just trying to, check some boxes before he rides off to the sunset in Nantucket with Cougar Linda in the next 2 or 3 years. Now, who's going to be their coach? Who knows? Maybe he hands it off to Jared Mayo. But that's why he's doing all this weird stuff. Older people, super rich guys that are super successful, they can do some weird things in their 70s. I know I saw it as a kid growing up. Some of my friends' grandparents that ran companies that were successful is start going off the rails a little bit. And I'm not saying Bill's losing it or anything, but he's just going to do some wacky things moving forward. Be prepared. The other thing is I don't think we've talked about it a little bit, but really just the actual trades in a vacuum were such big deals, right? Khalil Mack getting traded, Tyreek Hill getting traded, obviously Devontae getting traded, Russell Wilson getting traded. I do think there's been a Rams ramification of the NFL. And anytime you're a trendsetter, you're always going to be called an idiot, a whack job. You're going to fail. Anyone that trend sets, every average person and the majority of humans are going to say you're going to fail. That's dumb. It's human nature, right? I just think of a couple years ago. Do you remember when Russell Okun, I didn't really probably know what Bitcoin was. Not that I didn't have heard of it, but probably till the last couple years. Really, cryptocurrency, all that stuff. I could not even, I can't explain it now, but I definitely couldn't have even said more than a sentence on it 2 years ago. And I'll never forget when he wanted to get paid in Bitcoin, every single person, and I'm probably guilty, like, what the fuck is this guy doing? What a moron. And think how many players are going to be paid in Bitcoin in the future, moving forward. I got news for you, it's going to be a lot. He was just the first. And he might, maybe if you're listening to this, you're a crypto guy, there are others, but there are going to be many, many more moving forward. Honestly, in 20 years, it's not out of the realm of possibility that a large percentage of players, and that large percentage of players could be like 30, 40%, are being paid in cryptocurrency. I would never discount that. Now, I can't read the future, but it's clearly a trend where we're headed, right? At any time you set the trend in anything in society, you're called an idiot. And let's face it, people thought the Rams were off their rockers for years. I've seen it in my own business, right? Like, remember like 5-6 years ago when everyone started pivoting to like video and they told all the big J journals, they're like, listen, this writing thing, these newspapers are going to die eventually, right? So you better get on video. Remember Jake Paul was like, all these idiot YouTubers, what are these YouTubers doing it? Then the list of how much all the YouTubers were making, they're no longer called idiots. They're called businessmen that are printing cash. And do you notice now? Everyone's on YouTube. Why? Because there's money to be made on YouTube. But 5, 6, 8 years ago, if you're like, I made my living off YouTube, I love saying, they're like, what do you do for a living? I'm like, I'm a podcaster. Listen, it's not, it feels big to me, but a lot of people are like, man, you can make a living off that? It's like, yeah, I do okay. But you get kind of side-eyed. But if I said, you know what? I sell insurance, they'd be like, that is a stable job. Way to go, John. But if I stream for a living, they'd be like, what? What are you doing? And just the nature of the deal. The Rams have been trading these picks for a long period of time. Because I've been talking about this for a long time because I've heard so many general managers talk about it. And really, this guy takes a lot of shit, but the most outspoken of it all was John Schneider. And for a long period of time, right, the Seattle Seahawks were always drafting somewhere between like 24 and 31 or 32, right? They always drafted in the late to mid-20s. And John Schneider was adamant. He's like, the reason we're always trading back or trading that pick for players is because on any given draft, there are not 32 first-round players. There are only 16 to 18. And some years there might be 14. Now, obviously, there are going to be 32 picks in the first round. But if I'm drafting a guy at 24 that I have a second-round grade on, I then have to pay that guy first-round money. And there's not great value to that. Now, if that guy becomes, and here's the thing, on draft night and your draft grades, like 3 years later, they don't always reflect. You're not always going to be right, but you can only go off the information you have. So on draft night, if I'm, let's say, the Miami Dolphins and the Oakland Raiders, they both traded picks in the 20s. The Raiders traded pick 22 for Devontae, and obviously they're second. And the Miami Dolphins traded the 49ers pick at 29. I actually think it's pretty easy for them to justify. More than likely, this draft is not known as a very top-heavy draft. There's a lot of depth in the draft. But it's definitely not viewed as a lot of difference-making players in the first round. Like last year, it was pretty clear there were some studs, right? Kyle Pitts was considered a Hall of Fame talent. Jamar Chase had one of the greatest college seasons we'd ever seen. One thing's looking back, if Micah Parsons hadn't sat out the season, that guy's going top 5. And then you factor in all the quarterbacks, you factor in the linemen. Like they were flying. It was viewed as an elite draft for a reason. They were just difference-making players. This draft is not viewed that way. So when you're making these trades, you look at forever, it was like, if you make that trade and it blows up in your face, you're going to suck. Well, the Rams haven't been perfect on all their trades, right? Brandon Cooks, that was a flop. Didn't they once upon a time trade for Sammy Watkins? That didn't really work. Obviously, Jalen Ramsey has gone pretty well. I would call that like a B+. I wouldn't give it like an A+. I'd say Matt Stafford was basically an A-A. But it shows when you get talent, if you can afford to pay him on the cap and your owner has the cash to put in escrow / the signing bonus, it makes no sense to keep that pick in the late first round. It just doesn't, unless you need to reset your team. Like, I think that's the way the Chiefs view it, right? They chose to pivot off that, and who knows? Is it inconceivable to think that they use one of those picks to trade for a player, maybe trade back and accumulate more picks next year? I think everything's on the table. They just wanted more options. But I do think that the Rams have shown the league that these picks in the 20s, who gives a shit? Why does it matter? Do you think the 49ers, now they don't even know if Trey Lance can play, but ultimately they traded pick 29. Like that was the pick they used. The Rams used pick 32 to get Matt Stafford. So I think sometimes when we use the power of picks, and listen, I was a college scout, the power of picks is a really big deal. But I've seen a lot of picks. For every Fletcher Cox when I was with the Eagles, we drafted some Danny Watkins. So picks are just that. They are a complete gamble. One thing that's not a gamble, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, Khalil Mack, Russell Wilson. Now, it'd be like, well, what if those guys get hurt? Yeah, it's football. Guys can get hurt on any given snap, on any given play. They can get hurt in the weight room. They can get hurt training on a grass field in May. They can get hurt in an NFL game in November. You can't control any of that. But I know this guy's an elite ass kicker, and the Rams have shown, just put your chips in the middle of the table. What are you wasting time for? And you would say that the money flowing into the NFL, owners have never had less patience. So they're not going to wait around for you to lose. And it's like, well, we missed on another pick. You're going to get fired. Baker Mayfield, which John Lynch today explained, let's face it, the 49ers overplayed their Jimmy Garoppolo hand. He got surgery and it blew up in their face, and now they're stuck with him, at least till training camp. And then they're also praying for someone to get hurt. Who knows if that's going to happen? But we've all agreed that Jimmy's a very flawed player. Like, his best quality is the human being. When your best quality as a quarterback is like, this guy's a great guy. Like when we say, what's Tom Brady's best quality? It's not that he's a teammate, and he's the greatest teammate of all time. It's like his arm, his mind, his ability to manipulate defenses, Peyton, the way we describe all these guys. And then you talk about the guy. I said this a while back. Baker Mayfield, when Chris Mortensen talks and he crushes a player, I truly believe that comes from the owner. Chris Mortensen ain't your new age Big J Journo. He knows every single owner on speed dial. And when you're going to say something as an old school Big J about someone's character, you're going to have it backed up by someone you feel comfortable with. And the owner is someone you're going to feel very comfortable with because he's telling you something that clearly he gets from the coach and the general manager. Is kind of an unfiltered thing. And I said this within the last, whatever Mort said about Baker Mayfield, that they want a grown-up in the room. I can't get over, and I've been saying for a while, like, I was much more mature in my 30s than I was in my 20s, but I also never got married. If a married man, whether that guy is 25 or whether that guy's 40, has been married a couple years, and someone describes that individual as very immature, I kind of red flag just the whole situation. Last serious relationship I was in, I feel like I grew as a human exponentially. I came out of that thing a way better human being. And most people are. Like, there's a reason people settle down. It helps them focus. It helps them just grow as a guy. And this is a married guy that clearly Cleveland thinks is a complete slap. There's a reason he's still on the team, because I think he's toxic around the league. This guy was the number 1 overall pick, and we could argue if that was an overdraft, which, in hindsight it was. But just a couple years ago, in 2020, he had a fantastic season. And I understand he's injured or had an injury this last year, but that shouldn't wipe away everything that positively happened for the guy 2 years ago, right? Matt Ryan's been up and down for years. And it's like, well, he's such a good guy. Think about all the quarterbacks. Matt Ryan, such a great guy. We crushed Carson Wentz. Rightfully so. It's like, what is your deal? And forever there were two sides with the Baker Mayfield thing. And Coward was the leader on the one side, and he was proven right. Like, they call this guy not an adult in the room, like can't get his stuff together, and they basically can't stand the guy. And they went to Deshaun Watson, who has 22 civil cases pending. And I just, to me, Baker's a walking, talking red flag at this point. Like, I don't know. I mean, I feel if I was another team, I wouldn't touch him. He's on the books for $18 million. His old team that he had success with couldn't run him out of the build. One thing, like with Indy and Carson Wentz, he was there 1 year. He blew it the last 2 games, and they missed the playoffs. Baker Mayfield, the Cleveland Browns has been in the playoffs one time in the last 15 years, and Baker Mayfield was the quarterback. A year later, they're like, we are done with this cat. We can't stand him. We're going to move off of him. And, it's not like he's just, he's got he's just single. He's out and about. Like, dude's married. It's like, and he still can't figure it out. What a bizarre kind of fall from grace, even in Cleveland. Some other news today is the Hard Knocks. I think the brand's dead. I thought it officially died last year. I thought it was unwatchable. I watched the first episode and I was done. I couldn't watch anymore. It's become, we know too much about the NFL. We've seen it before. Hard Knocks have been going now for 2 decades. Like, we saw inside the meeting room with the coaches and the scouts. Like, we've seen inside a guy getting cut, and they don't show any of that stuff anymore. So my question is, with Hard Knocks, like, is this thing even around in a couple years? All these teams now do their own internal deals, right? They all, if you go to their YouTube page, all do some semblance of their own Hard Knocks. And they did the Detroit Lions, which I understand Dan Campbell probably be kind of entertaining for the bits and pieces that you show him. But overall, like, there hasn't been a Hard Knocks on paper that I will be like, yeah, if I don't watch 1 second, I don't care. Now, I'm sure there will be some funny stuff with Dan Campbell, and I'll watch a little, but I really think it's over. The ratings last year were in the tank. I think the consumer's kind of bored with it because it's too bland now. You got to give us something. I say it all the time about the Netflix F1 series. You couldn't pay me to watch F1. Until this last week, I actually watched probably 20 laps of the deal. I don't care about racing at all. But their content on that show is fantastic. The different, what would be the equivalent of coaches or GMs on the different teams constantly talk shit about each other. The drivers will talk some shit about each other or the other teams. There is conflict. There's no really conflict in Hard Knocks anymore. Like, the undrafted free agent that's not going to make the team. Like, we've seen this story over and over and over again. And now in the individual teams, like the Colts do something that is just much better than anything you'll see on Hard Knocks. So I think it's kind of over. The Bills are officially now getting a stadium. There were some threats about maybe them moving, what was going to happen, who was going to pay. $850 million given by the taxpayer. Of course, the natural inclination of social media is like, how could the government give them any money? It's like, listen, I live in California. We have like a $2 trillion surplus of cash. I used to think, like, you'll pay more in taxes, you help out the single mom and the poor kid. That's not what happens. Again, I live in California where we have more tax revenue than any other state by a distant mile. We lead the country in poor people, and it ain't going to the single moms. So it's not like this tax money actually helps anybody. That's my thing. Like, if you were the Bills, how do you blame anyone for taking free money? If someone would give you free money, like the government would be like, hey, you want to buy a house? We will give you the down payment. Would you say no? Like, of course, it's just business 101. But this notion that these tax dollars would go to help other people, again, people are rotting in California. We have the market cornered on homeless people, and somehow we operate like we're Apple and have this $1 trillion surplus of tax revenue. So this notion that it could go to help someone, well, yeah, it could in theory, but that's not actually what we ever use the money for. So I don't ever get bothered by these teams that get money from the government, because I've seen it firsthand forever in California. You just fucking waste away cash year in, year out, and you don't actually help the people that need the help. So the reaction on social media is very, very predictable, but it's not reality. Period, point blank, end of story. So the Bills are getting a new stadium. Happy for Bills fans. Probably look pretty sweet. And the Peligulas, who have a shitload ton of money, I understand getting mad that super rich people can pull stuff off like this, but it's happened for a long time. It's going to continue happening. My main issue is just thinking that those tax dollars would actually be used correctly to help the people in need, because that's just not what happens. Malik Willis, a lot of buzz that he's going to be the first quarterback. I think it's a lock, because the other guys, like, why would you, if you got a chance to take a big swing, why would you try to hit a double? The whole point of taking a quarterback really high is to hit a home run, is to land a Josh Allen, is to land a Patrick Mahomes, is to land a Justin Herbert, is hell to land what if we could redo that draft, Lamar Jackson's going 2, right? If Josh going 1, he's going 2. You're trying to hit a grand slam. Like, ultimately, if your comp for Kenny Pickett is like, he's like Mac Jones, Kirk Cousins, like the other guy, it's like, well, he could be a star. He might not be. You might whiff, but you might as well take a big swing. So to me, Malik Willis, I even saw Tomlin. Tomlin can't even hide his excitement on the guy. The thing is, the Steelers, he's never going to get last to the Steelers. Like, that's not happening, So the thing with Malik Willis, I think there is probably a 50-50 chance. As crazy as it is, the one game I've watched him, Ole Miss, he was terrible. Now he's playing Liberty. They're playing the SEC team that won 10 games. I mean, Ole Miss beat Texas A&M. I mean, they were legit. I mean, it was the best regular season in the history of the program. But my one exposure, not great. But physically, I will not dispute. I remember my couple exposures with Josh Allen when he was at Wyoming, against Oregon, I think against Iowa. Maybe it was Nevada. I forget who the couple games, the national television games that I watched. It was ugly. It was really, really bad. And he's gone on to become a great player. So to me, you could easily justify, there's a reason we pay our head coach $10 million. There's a reason we pay our offensive coach a couple $1 million. There's a reason we pay our quarterback coach $800,000. Earn your fucking money. Coach this guy up. That would, if I was the owner, that would be my mindset. Like, does this guy have the physical traits to coach up? Because I've seen enough guys now get coached up and improve. Justin Herbert, I thought he was kind of inaccurate in college. He's been very accurate in the pros. Like, whoever's coaching him is doing a good job. Why are we paying you guys all this money? You guys are paid a premium. It's like, coach these guys up. And to me, Malik Willis would be the no-brainer if I'm taking a swing. Now, that might, again, some of these guys, eventually some of these quarterbacks are not going to work out, right? And we started to see it, right? Sam Darnold flop, Baker Mayfield in shambles, Josh Rosen's a joke. I mean, it started to slowly creep in last year. It's like, a couple of these guys, like, of those 5 players, 2 or 3 of them are just not going to be good NFL players. It's hard to tell after one season, but like in a couple years, we're going to know for sure. Not all of them are not getting $100 million extensions. That's not happening. The coach's picture came out, and I said this yesterday, weird things are going on in Carolina. Anytime that you leak that you're basically who you have first round draft grades on is a little bizarre. One, you're either directly lying to the newspaper beat reporter, which is not abnormal. That happens. This is known as lying season. You push things out. But I don't really know on March 28th how that behooves you. Maybe because, you're negotiating with the 49ers or the Browns over their quarterbacks in a trade. So you're trying to let them know, like, we have really high draft grades. That's possible. But as I've said, I do think the owner, given his level of wealth, given how new he is, given how much he paid for the team, all in cash, has to be getting very, very impatient. Has to be getting very, very edgy. The picture that stood out to me in that coach's photo today, Matt Rhule looks absolutely terrible. He's not 65 years old. I looked it up before I hopped on here. He's 47 years old. You know how, like, when a president goes in and then he comes out and he looks like 20 years older? Sometimes that happens with football coaches, right? You're an offensive coordinator. You're in shape because you're able to get workouts in. You got some time management. Then you become a head coach, and it just all goes out the window. And you leave the office 5 years later, you look like Matt Patricia. Matt Rhule looks like he's gained about 50 pounds. He looks as unhealthy as you can possibly look. And I just wonder if this Carolina experiment, they gave him so much money, money talks, shit walks. It was hard for him to turn down the opportunity to be an NFL head coach, the opportunity to run an organization. I completely understand why he took it, but it's been a complete failure. And his body just shows it. Like, he just looks like, I'm a disaster. This is a disaster. We're a disaster. Almost, I feel bad for him a little bit. And it's hard. Listen, the guy's got more money than he'll ever. Family's fine. But that's a miserable. He knows he's going nowhere fast. He's on a ship that isn't just taking on water, it's sinking. And, sometimes as the captain of the ship, you either go down with it. We've seen before in the NFL with college coaches, you jump off it. There's a lifeboat. And I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility if next year they're a 6-7 win team that Matt Rhule pulls a Nick Saban, that pulls a Bobby Petrino, and he's the head coach of a college program in the middle of December and just leaves. And it's just kind of a mutual breakup. They just go their separate ways because you cannot look at that picture and go, yeah, this guy's long for the league. Things aren't going well. The guy needs to get healthy. I mean, he really does. Adios.